Ladies and gentlemen, fellas, welcome back to the podcast and the YouTube channel. Today, we're talking about your early round running backs. As you can see, there's a couple of them behind me in the Supreme Draft Guide right here. Their player profiles, the early round running backs that I think might bust. Now, these are not guys that I'm throwing down my flag for, otherwise they would have been in videos already, right? These are early round running backs for a reason because they have a lot of upside. But I want to discuss a couple of them that I think have the highest bust potential out of probably the top 20 running backs. And honestly, I think all these guys are currently in my top 15. So some very prominent names, some guys that you're probably taking in the second round of your drafts in fantasy football, at most the third rounds if it's like a 10-team league. So yeah, these are guys that are big names, but I'm currently avoiding unless they just fall to me and they're like the last running back left at the end of the second or beginning of third round, right? Then I'll end up taking them, but I'm really cautious. Now, one of these guys that we're going to start the show with, I'm really not getting anywhere. I reach for other guys over him, honestly, at this point, because I'm putting all my eggs in one basket on the other part of his offense, his passing game. More on that in a second. But right here, thank you for being here with me. Please do hit the like button for this video and that subscribe button. Big one's popping up right now. Bottom right hand corner, best way to support the show, totally for free. If you're brand new, if you're just finding me, I appreciate you. I appreciate you if you're listening on the podcast. If you leave a podcast review, whether you're on YouTube and you go over there, Sal Vetri Show on iTunes, $50 giveaway once per week to somebody who does leave a review. You get about 5 or 6 a week at most, really, people leaving reviews. So if you want to do that, have a pretty good chance at $50. Takes literally 5 seconds of your time to hit the 5-star button and just say something nice about the show. So I appreciate that as well. Over my shoulder is my Supreme Draft Guide. Well, this is a piece of it. This is the player profiles for the running backs. You can see I have pretty nice little profiles once you click inside of here on a bunch of information that's going to be very helpful. Not only that, though, there's key stats, there's rankings, there's tiers, there's premium analysis and podcast coming in August. So be sure to check all of that out. I'm excited to have this up and running. It's all down below. And thanks to the sponsor of the show, the logo above, Monkey Knife Fight, it's only $10 for all of you instead of $30. You can feel free to check it out in the description right now. So let's start the show off. Why don't we, right? And let's start off with a player right now in Derrick Henry. Everybody's heads explode. Derrick Henry, the big dog, the guy who led the league in rushing last year, Sal. Yeah, right. We're going to get away from this guy, the guy who had 18 total touchdowns, second only to Christian McCaffrey and Aaron Jones last year. This is the guy that you want us to get away from. Yes, if I'm telling you about potential busts in, honestly, the first round out of the top 10 backs, it's going to be Derrick Henry if you told me to pick one. And if you want to argue with me, who's the other running back you're going to pick at this point? Sure, outside of, but Dalvin Cook might hold out. Yeah, outside of that, if all these players are going to play, Derrick Henry is the guy that I feel the least likely and the least confident in like top 8 backs and really those first round running backs. And let me just explain why pretty much. Like last year, yes, you know what happened. He led the league with 1,539 rushing yards. He ended up having the most carries, over 303 carries. He had 7 games with 20 or more carries. When you factor in 19 or more carries, so 1 away from 20 for the simple math there, he had 9 games. So more than half of his games were 19 or more carries. You have to have some pretty good game script to do that. Now, the Titans were still running the ball even when they were trailing by a touchdown in games. That's just because that they were still close enough, and that's what their offense was pretty much built on. But when you have a quarterback last year in Ryan Tannehill who led the league in true passer rating, who led the league in efficiency and points per dropback, and all these different metrics last year, was the most accurate passer in play action passing, that efficient of a player, paired up with a very efficient receiver in A.J. Brown, very efficient receiver in Jonnu Smith, it is just very unlikely for that to sustain to the next year. When you have a defense last year that going into the year was like at best a middle of the pack defense, and they propel upwards to being a very good run stopping defense and overall a pretty strong defense. Outside of their outside cornerback play, the secondary held up to a good extent and they outperform where they should have been. So you have a defense excelling above what it really was expected to do. You have by far a quarterback who was above all expectations of what he was supposed to do last year, and that really helps your running game and it allows you to hand the ball off 300 times to a running back. Oh, that running back who also only caught 18 balls last year in his time with the Titans. 19.6 fantasy points per game, was 4th among running backs. You see him at 20.2 attempts per game for 102.6 yards per game. That's obviously fantastic. Average more than a touchdown per game with the 18 total touchdowns. That touchdown rate was 5.6%. Nothing crazy, like it's not Aaron Jones marking or Raheem Mostert's 6.6 and 6.7%. 5.6 is still pretty high, but he had the workload, right? When you have a guy seeing 321 total touches and he has 46 red zone touches, there's probably a decent chance that he's going to pop off for a dozen touchdowns. He just had an even better year because of the volume, got to 18. But outside of the passing game being efficient and the defense being better than expected and above average, you look at what Derrick Henry did in yards created. He was the #1 running back in yards created last year. That is such a hard metric to duplicate back-to-back seasons. You want to know where he was in that number in 2018? Second. So unless this guy is going to become one of the best running backs of all time, and yes, the last 2 years he has looked extremely dominant, especially in the second half of seasons, finishing top 2 in yards created in back-to-back seasons is very impressive. Breaking tackles is what that means. Evaded tackles, he was 4th in 2018. Last year he was up there as well within the top 6 in evaded tackles. Last year he was #1 again in yards created, 2nd in runs of 15 or more yards. When you have this efficient of an offense, something's got to give. Now I am personally leveraging A.J. Brown's going to have a big year, Jonnu Smith, and Ryan Tannehill might take a step back, but I think think the defense gets worse, which means they have to pass the ball more if they're trailing more often in games or in neutral game scripts. And I think that naturally Derrick Henry is going to regress off of being the leading rusher, off of being a top 2 yards created guy in back-to-back seasons. I'm not just going to project him to be number 1 or 2 in that department. If he falls to even number 5 in that department, that's going to take a hit on his value. And then it's a factor of the other guys being drafted in the first rounds around him. I like the upside of guys like Joe Mixon ahead of him. I like the upside of some other guys in that range, whether it's your Miles Sanders, whether it's your Josh Jacobs, whether it's your Kenyon Drakes, guys who just have upside in my opinion, and they just have outs. Now, maybe not Josh Jacobs having the outs in the passing game, but I think Joe Mixon, I think Kenyon Drake, those other running backs, definitely Miles Sanders, they have the outs in the passing game. They don't need to have 300 touches on the ground. Although I think some of them have the upside, like a Joe Mixon, to see around a 280, 290 touch season. Nick Chubb can see a 300 touch season on the ground, and yes, he might now be in a role where he's only seeing 20 or 25 rushing attempts, but his offense is setting up to be even more run heavy with Kevin Stefanski. These are other guys around Derrick Henry that when I'm on the clock and some of the other guys that are taken, I'm usually taking a Joe Mixon. I'm debating on just snagging a Miles Sanders there over Derrick Henry. And you can tell yourself that Derrick Henry is going to start to become a pass catcher this year because he's gone from 15 receptions in 2018 to 18 receptions. I think it was 12 receptions the year before. So you can tell yourself that he's going to keep catching 3 passes and get to 21. Or maybe you think he takes on an even bigger role. There's been no news of that. There's been no talk of that. They drafted Darrington Evans to replace Dion Lewis, a running back. You can see right here their draft. The NFL draft, they take Darrington Evans in the 3rd round. They take a tackle to replace Jack Conklin. So that tackle is naturally, in my opinion, just going to be worse than Jack Conklin. That's at least what I'm going to project and expect for. And Darrington Evans taking on the Dion Lewis role, he's going to profile out as very much so a satellite back. Here's Darrington Evans' profile in college at Appalachian State. He caught 21 passes last year on a 7.6% target share. That's a pretty good pass-catching running back that I assume takes on that role that Dion Lewis had. Overall, he saw around 280 touches last year, had over 1,450 yards on the ground alone, and 18 total touchdowns. Darrington Evans is a good running back. I assume with that draft capital that they spent in the 3rd round, he is going to be involved on probably satellite back roles and maybe even get more involvement if indeed they need more pass-catching downs from their running backs. Outside of that, there's nothing in the backfield. And let's not kid ourselves. As long as Derrick Henry is going to stay healthy and he plays 16 games, he's going to see over 250 carries, no matter what the game script looks like. The issue is if he goes from 303 carries to say 260 carries and he's losing 40 to 45 carries and his receptions are staying equal even if they go up by 2, if you're losing 40 touches and you're a first-round running back, losing those touches is not good. Whereas a lot of these other running backs in the first round, if they were to lose 30 touches on the ground, right? If you have Joe Mixon coming in and you want to project him for 260 carries and he only gets 230, but he can see a jump in 15 or 20 receptions in his receiving game numbers, which I think is possible, and also a jump in his touchdown equity, because it's really difficult for Derrick Henry to take a jump in touchdowns from 18 last year. It would almost be historic to go from 18 to like 20 in back-to-back seasons. So there's just not a lot of outs left on the table for Derrick Henry. We have him skyrocketing right now in our expectations because of last year. Last year, which is going to see probably touchdown regression, which is just naturally going to see touch regression because of just the overall efficiency of this offense and just naturally relying on a guy to get back-to-back 300 touch seasons on the ground in the NFL is not something that I want to be doing. So Derrick Henry, look, I don't hate the guy. I just like more guys around him. I personally have him ranked lower than consensus. He's currently, I believe, my RB7. A lot of people have him at RB5 or RB6. I still have Dalvin Cook ahead of him, even with the holdout concerns. Joe Mixon, same thing. Some holdout whispers. I still have Joe Mixon ahead of him. And honestly, at this point, I'm starting to really consider taking some other guys, whether it's Miles Sanders, Kenyon Drake, ahead of Derrick Henry at this point. So he's the first guy that I would say is a potential bust. I'm not labeling him as a definite bust. None of these guys are, in my opinion, but he's definitely a guy who stands out, and I look at him and go, yeah, I don't really want to be drafting him as much as other people. Next up is somebody that I know a lot of you like, and it's going to be Austin Ekeler. And I know a lot of people like Ekeler. Ekeler to like start the season for me was like my RB9, RB10. I've slowly been backing him up. I believe he's currently my RB12. I could actually get you the official right now rankings as I pull them up. Right now, Ekeler is my RB12. I have him one spot ahead of Todd Gurley, one spot behind Kenyon Drake. If you want to get the whole rankings, again, they're linked down below. For PPR, non-PPR formats, tiers are also in there, top 150s. It's down below in the Supreme Draft Guide on my website. Information on how to get it for just $10 Rooskies are down below. Also, before we dive deeper into Austin Ekeler, please do hit the like button and the big old subscribe button. Take a second of your time on the podcast. If you want to leave a 5-star rate and review, chance to win $50 Rooskies. Smack them dollar Rooskies in your pocket. Go buy yourself some nice dinner, buy yourself some new shoes. I don't know what you can get for $50 with new shoes, but whatever you want to do, go spend your money. I don't tell you how to do it. Just take my money and spend it. Leave the review. You can do that. So Austin Ekeler, I love the guy. Look, it's really hard not to like a guy in Austin Ekeler with the skill set that he has. Honestly, the personality, if you've ever listened to interviews of Austin Ekeler, are just as good. Second in receptions last year among running backs with 92. So let's just pull up the stats right now, and then I'll explain why I don't like him as much as a lot of the other guys around him in terms of upside. It's really hard. Like I'm really picking here and trying to choose out some guys, but I think there are some flaws in the Austin Ekeler projections of some guys putting him as like RB5, RB6, RB7. I can start to see like the RB8, 9, 10 range if you wanted to, but anything higher than that, putting him ahead of guys like Joe Mixon for me, Dalvin Cook, that's just a little bit too high. 57% of the snaps last year. Obviously, Melvin Gordon returned after a month or so of his holdout. 132 carries, 557 yards, 11 touchdowns, and the big one, 92 receptions, second in the league. 993 receiving yards, second in the league. Only one Christian McCaffrey. He was third in routes run behind Leonard Fournette and Christian McCaffrey amongst running backs. Second in receptions, targets, and receiving yards overall. Number 6 in fantasy points per game among running backs at 19.3. And he ran behind the 27th ranked run blocking unit, which didn't help him or Melvin Gordon last year, with some major improvements coming in Brian Bulaga and Trey Turner. Bulaga from the Packers, Trey Turner from the Panthers. So you can see their offseason additions right here. The offensive line is what they got really in free agency. Donald Parham, the former XFL tight end from the Dallas Renegades. Looking forward to seeing him play. Hopefully he gets some run. And then they lose the big veterans, Russell Okung on the offensive line, Melvin Gordon, and Philip Rivers. Obviously, Gordon going is going to help Austin Ekeler, or at least a lot of people expect that to help Austin Ekeler. The NFL draft, they already have Justin Jackson in this backfield. They're going at Joshua Kelly, 4th round running back from UCLA. In my opinion, a very good value pick. And then they get some late round wide receivers who I like both. KJ Hill in the 7th is a good pick. Joe Reed in the 5th, I like a lot. A good special teams player in college, I believe, at Virginia. And then they get their quarterback in the 1st round, Justin Herbert. We'll see if he actually plays at all this year. I would assume at some point he does, but Tyrod Taylor, pretty good starting quarterback. Speaking of Tyrod Taylor, more mobile of a quarterback, not going to check down as much. This is concerns, right? When he was in Buffalo, when LaShawn McCoy was there for some time, the issue was LaShawn McCoy wasn't catching as many passes because Tyrod Taylor was taking off on 3rd down and 3s. Instead of checking it off, Tyrod Taylor was running for it. He was scrambling more often and finding more players downfield rather than taking the easy dump off to the running back. So right away, that's concerning for Austin Ekeler's upside in just his receiving game numbers, where he had 92 receptions on 108 targets last year. If the targets dip to like 90 this year, that's a big hit of 18. If that means that the receptions go from 92 to like 75, that's a huge hit. And 75 is still a lot of receptions for a starting running back for sure. But there's other pieces of the game that I'm concerned about. You have a yards per touch guy last year, led the league in yards per touch at 6.9. A lot of that is because of the receptions. But on the ground, he was still serviceable. 4 yards per carry was 34th in the league. That's nothing fantastic, but you talk about all backup running backs, and it's like around an average number, 4 yards per carry. But the yards per touch is the one that really stands out to me. It's something that I don't know if I can continue to bank on happening. And what I think a lot of people are expecting is that just Austin Ekeler is going to be the workhorse back, is going to see 24 carries and 24 total touches a game, right? That's just not going to happen. You could look at what happened last year. Justin Jackson was involved in this offense when Melvin Gordon was on holdout, to the extent of Austin Ekeler seeing this workload in the 4 games. 12 carries to start the season, 17 carries was a big number, 9 carries, 18 carries. And then obviously Melvin Gordon comes back and he quickly resorts to just the pass catching role primarily, where he goes for 3 carries, 5, 5, 3, 12, 6, right? So there was never a workload of 24 carries, right? When you factor in his receptions those week, yeah, he started to look very good. He had 18 touches week 1, he had 23 week 2, 16 week 3, and he had 23 week 4. So yeah, when you factor in the receptions, this was a workhorse back, and that's something that looked really well, but there was concerns during that time. They were already talking about on this offense, Anthony Lynn and the offense in general, limiting his touches and getting more involvement from Justin Jackson, getting even more involvement now potentially coming in Joshua Kelly. I still think Justin Jackson is going to be the lead back, especially since he has experience, and Kelly with a limited offseason, no rookie camp, no preseason is very likely at this point. Based on when I'm recording this, that there's going to be an issue with Joshua Kelly, but I think Joshua Kelly has a really good chance. He's a bigger running back than Justin Jackson at this point, so more goal line work potentially is there. But there's a pretty decent chance that Justin Jackson is going to be involved and or Joshua Kelly in the backfield. So a decent enough chance for the guys around him for me to want to take those guys. I feel more secure in Kenyon Drake's workload. I feel much more secure in Miles Sanders' workload as of right now and these types of players than I do in an Austin Ekeler. Even Todd Gurley, who I have ranked 1 spot behind him, I feel very secure in that workload. There's just no running back depth behind Todd Gurley. So I could even argue that Todd Gurley's an RB12 and Austin Ekeler is the RB13 this year. And when I see a lot of guys ranking Austin Ekeler as like the 6th or 7th overall running back, and honestly just in a ton of top 10s, that's when I start to say, okay, if I'm trying to identify some guys who are potentially going to bust based on like the majority of people's expectations, Derrick Henry being one of them, 1st round pick, a lot of people automatically wanting to take him as like the 5th or 6th running back. And then Austin Ekeler, a lot of people wanted to take him honestly in the 1st round right now. And if you're coming into half PPR or non-PPR formats, then yeah, Austin Ekeler to me is definitely a guy who's probably going to bust. If it's PPR, that's where I understand the top 10 upside in some of those picks. Now again, these are not guys I'm labeling as these guys aren't going to do well this year. I'm looking at my top 15 and my top 20 running backs, and these are 3 names that I look at and say, yeah, there's some question marks. Yeah, there's some potential risks. Yeah, there's some regression potential here for them. Who would you say out of like the top 15 or 20 consensus running backs or even your personal rankings are guys that stand out for you to be 3 potential risks? Let me know in the comments down below. Before you leave, like button, smash that bad boy, hit the big old subscribe button, and head over right now to the Supreme Draft Guide and be sure to get it on Fantasy Sports Focus. It's linked down below. This is where all the running back profiles are, key stats, rankings, all that stuff. Just $10 thanks to Monkey Knife Fight. You can find it down below in the description. So thanks for tuning into this one. Like and subscribe before you go, and I will see you in the next one.